The Galactic Education Conspiracy, the Transport Shuttle Harmony's Edge descended through the atmospheric layers of Kepler 442b, its hull gleaming against the twin suns that bathed the planet in golden light. Dr. Sarah Chun pressed her face to the viewport, watching as the interstellar university emerged from the morning mists like something from a dream. Crystalline spires twisted skyward in impossible spirals, while floating platforms drifted between buildings connected by streams of pure energy. After 30 years of studying human history on Earth, she was finally here, about to become the first human professor at the galaxy's most prestigious educational institution. The docking bay bustled with activity as beings from dozens of species moved about their daily routines. Sarah shouldered her travel bag, containing centuries of human historical records she'd digitized for her new position. The university had specifically requested a human historian to teach comparative civilizations, claiming they wanted to add Earth's perspective to their curriculum. She'd been thrilled at the opportunity to share humanity's story with the galaxy. Professor Zeth Carey stood waiting at the arrival's gate, his crystalline form refracting the station lights into rainbow patterns across the walls. The Viridian species communicated through harmonic vibrations that the universal translators converted into melodic speech. Dr. Chun, welcome to our institution of learning. I am most eager to discuss your curriculum proposals. As they walked through corridors lined with holographic displays showing the achievements of various galactic civilizations, Sarah noticed something odd. The displays featured the architectural marvels of the Centaurian Empire, the philosophical breakthroughs of the Void Walkers, the artistic renaissance of the Singing Worlds, but nowhere did she see any mention of Earth or humanity. Professor Zeth Carey, she said, pausing before a display celebrating the peaceful unification of the Spiral Arm Coalition, I don't see any human achievements represented here. Surely some of our contributions to galactic civilization deserve recognition. The crystalline being's harmonics shifted to a lower, more careful tone. Human achievements are complex to represent properly. We focus on civilizations that developed through more harmonious means. Sarah's academic instinct sharpened. In her experience, when educators avoided direct answers, they were hiding something significant. She decided to investigate further during her orientation tour. The faculty housing complex rivaled the finest research centers on Earth, with living quarters that adjusted automatically to each species' environmental needs. Sarah's apartment featured Earth normal gravity and atmosphere, with walls that could display any environment from her home planet. As she unpacked her belongings, she activated her personal research terminal and began exploring the university's vast digital library. What she discovered made her blood run cold. The search for human history returned exactly 17 results, all brief academic papers focused on humanity's recent integration into galactic society. There was nothing about Earth's ancient civilizations, no mention of the Renaissance, no records of the World Wars, no documentation of the space race or the colonization of Mars. It was as if human civilization had begun only when they'd achieved faster-than-light travel 50 years ago. Sarah tried different search terms. Earth conflicts yielded 3 sanitized diplomatic studies. Human warfare produced a single paper classifying humans as a militaristic species requiring careful observation. Terran historical periods returned an error message stating that such records were restricted for educational stability purposes. A soft chime announced a visitor. Sarah opened her door to find Vexila, the university's head librarian, floating in a mobility tank filled with the ammonia-based atmosphere her aquatic species required. Her tentacles moved in graceful patterns as she spoke through her suit's external speakers. Dr. Chin, I apologize for the intrusion, but I noticed unusual search patterns from your terminal. As head librarian, I must inform you that certain historical records are classified under the Educational Protection Protocol. Educational Protection Protocol? Sarah stepped aside to let the librarian enter. I've never heard of such a thing. I'm supposed to be teaching comparative civilizations. How can I do that without access to complete historical records? Vexila's tentacles curled in what Sarah's xenobiology training recognized as distress. Dr. Chun, you must understand. The species in our galaxy have evolved along very different paths. Most developed intelligence through cooperation, symbiosis, or collective consciousness. The concept of sustained conflict, strategic deception, and competitive resource acquisition that characterizes human development is disturbing to many of our students. Disturbing? Sarah's voice rose. History isn't supposed to be comfortable. It's supposed to be educational. How do your students learn about overcoming adversity if you hide all examples of civilizations that faced and conquered impossible challenges? The aquatic beings form rippled with agitation. That is precisely the concern, Dr. Chun. Human history demonstrates a pattern of overcoming impossible odds through methods that other species find psychologically harmful to contemplate. Your species' tendency to treat overwhelming opposition as merely another problem to solve has been classified as a mimetic hazard. Sarah stared at her visitor in disbelief. You're afraid that learning about human resilience might be contagious? 3 universities have reported psychological disturbances among students after exposure to unfiltered human historical records, Vexila explained. Species that evolved as prey animals experience severe anxiety when learning about human persistence hunting. Collective consciousness species showed signs of individual identity formation after studying human concepts of personal freedom. The Galactic Education Council determined that human history requires specialized contextual framing to prevent cultural contamination. Cultural contamination, Sarah repeated flatly. You mean learning that it's possible to refuse to give up when faced with extinction? Vexila's translator remained silent for a long moment. Dr. Chun, your species survived ice ages, plague pandemics, world wars, and near-extinction events multiple times. You developed civilization on a planet where everything from the weather to the wildlife seemed designed to kill you. Most species in the galaxy evolved on peaceful worlds with stable climates and cooperative ecosystems. The psychological impact of fully comprehending human historical development has proven destabilizing. After the librarian left, Sarah sat in her apartment staring at the Earth landscape displayed on her walls. The rolling hills of Tuscany seemed impossibly peaceful compared to the revelation she'd just received. The galaxy's educational institutions were systematically censoring human history because it demonstrated that impossible situations could be overcome through determination, innovation, and refusing to accept defeat. The next morning brought Sarah's first classes. She'd been assigned 3 courses: Introduction to Galactic Civilizations, Comparative Cultural Development, and Advanced Studies in Interspecies Relations. Her first class contained representatives from 12 different species, all eager to learn from their first human professor. Good morning, everyone, Sarah began, surveying the diverse group of students. I'd like to start with a simple question. What do you know about human civilization? Crix, a young member of the hive mind species whose individual consciousness was still developing, raised a tentacle. Humans are a recently spacefaring species known for rapid technological adaptation and efficient resource utilization. A crystalline student named Shardeth added, Human society is characterized by individual decision-making rather than collective consciousness, which some scholars consider a developmental abnormality. Sarah felt her jaw tighten. Interesting perspectives. What about human history before space travel? Our art, literature, scientific discoveries, or cultural achievements? The classroom fell silent. Students exchanged glances through various sensory methods, but no one responded. Surely someone has studied Earth's classical civilizations? The Renaissance? The Industrial Revolution? Sarah pressed Morthek, an elderly student from the silicon-based granite worlds, finally spoke. Professor Chen, our curriculum focuses on successful civilization development patterns. Human history is considered too chaotic for productive study. Chaotic, Sarah repeated. She walked to the classroom's holographic display and activated her personal files, overriding the standard university restrictions with her faculty access codes. Let me show you something. The display filled with an image of the Great Wall of China, its ancient stones stretching across impossible mountain terrain. 2,000 years ago, Humans built this fortification across thousands of miles of hostile terrain using nothing but hand tools and determination. The project took over a century and required millions of workers. The students leaned forward, captivated despite themselves. Sarah switched to another image showing the Sistine Chapel ceiling. One human artist spent 4 years lying on his back, painting this masterpiece, despite having no experience with ceiling frescoes and suffering constant physical pain from the awkward position. More images followed: the pyramids of Giza, Machu Picchu, the Apollo moon landing, the Hubble Space Telescope images, medical breakthroughs that had saved billions of lives. With each image, Sarah watched her students' expressions change from polite interest to genuine fascination. "Professor," Crix interrupted, "these achievements seem impossible given the technological limitations you've described. How did humans accomplish such tasks?" "That's exactly the point," Sarah replied. "Humans have a saying: impossible is just another word for something we haven't figured out yet. When faced with overwhelming challenges, we don't give up. We innovate, adapt, and persist until we find a solution." Shar Detha's crystalline form shimmered with excitement. "But surely this required immense collective effort? How did individual-minded beings coordinate such massive projects?" Sarah smiled. Through another uniquely human trait: the ability to unite around shared goals while maintaining individual identity. We call it cooperation without assimilation. The classroom door hissed open, and Professor Zeth Carey entered with 2 university security officers. His harmonic voice carried undertones of severe displeasure. "Dr. Chun, you are displaying unauthorized historical materials in violation of the Educational Protection Protocol. Class is dismissed immediately." As the students reluctantly filed out, many turning back to look at the humans' achievements still glowing on the display, Sarah realized she just started something that the university administration would find very difficult to stop. The truth about human resilience was out, and judging by her students' reactions, it was already beginning to spread. That evening, Sarah received an encrypted message on her personal communicator. The sender was listed as concerned faculty, and the message was brief: "If you truly wish to teach complete human history, meet us in Archive Level 7, Section Theta 9, at midnight. Come alone and tell no one." The truth about why we fear human history goes deeper than you imagine. As Sarah prepared for the clandestine meeting, she reflected on the day's revelations. The galaxy's educators weren't just censoring human history out of concern for student psychology. They were afraid that learning about human achievements would inspire other species to attempt their own impossible tasks. They were terrified that human determination might indeed be contagious, and that a galaxy full of beings who refused to accept defeat would fundamentally change the existing order. Looking out at the alien stars wheeling overhead, Sarah made a decision that would ultimately reshape galactic education forever. If the university administration wanted to hide the truth about human resilience, she would ensure that truth found another way to shine through the darkness. After all, overcoming impossible odds was what humans did best. Underground Lessons Archive Level 7 existed in the forgotten depths of the interstellar university, where obsolete data storage systems hummed quietly in the darkness. Sarah navigated the maze of corridors using only the emergency lighting, her footsteps echoing in the silence. Section Theta 9 proved to be a vast chamber filled with crystalline data matrices from the university's early centuries, their surfaces dim with age. She wasn't alone. A figure emerged from behind a towering data pillar, and Sarah recognized Elder Mothera, one of the few faculty members whose species predated galactic civilization. The ancient tree-like being moved slowly, her bark-covered limbs creaking softly as she approached. "Dr. Chun," Mothera's voice rustled like wind through autumn leaves, transmitted through bioluminescent patches that served as her communication organs. "I have watched this institution suppress knowledge for 3 centuries. Never have I seen such systematic censorship as what they have done to your species' history. You sent the message?" Sarah asked, surprised. Mothera was known as one of the most conservative faculty members, someone who rarely spoke during meetings and never challenged administrative decisions. My species has a saying, the elder continued, truth suppressed does not disappear. It grows stronger in darkness until it becomes impossible to contain. I have been waiting for someone with the courage to release what has been hidden. Mothera led Sarah deeper into the archives, to a section sealed behind energy barriers. With movements that seemed to take forever, she interfaced with the ancient security systems using bioelectric tendrils that extended from her fingertips. The barriers dissolved, revealing a hidden chamber filled with complete and censored records of human civilization. This is what they don't want the galaxy to see, Mothera explained, activating the holographic displays. The chamber filled with images and data streams showing the complete scope of human achievement and failure. Your species' history contains something that terrifies the Galactic Education Council. It proves that evolution is not destiny. Sarah stared at the comprehensive records surrounding her. Battle plans from the Second World War showed human strategic thinking that had turned certain defeat into victory. Scientific journals documented how humans had conquered diseases that should have eliminated their species. Archaeological data revealed civilizations that had risen from ashes repeatedly, each time stronger than before. Every species in this galaxy evolved along predictable paths, Mothera continued. Prey species developed collective consciousness for protection. Predator species created rigid hierarchies for hunting efficiency. Symbiotic species formed permanent partnerships. Environmental specialists adapted to specific conditions. But humans did something unprecedented. They refused to be limited by their evolutionary path. The displays showed human settlements in the Arctic, the Sahara, mountain peaks, and ocean depths. They revealed humans adapting to every environment on Earth without genetic modification, purely through technology and determination. Your species developed intelligence not to fit into your environment, but to change it, Mothera observed. This terrifies administrators who believe that natural limitations cannot be overcome. If students learn that evolutionary constraints are merely challenges to be solved, the entire galactic social order becomes unstable. A soft footstep in the corridor made both beings freeze. Sarah motioned for Mothera to dim the displays as three figures entered the hidden chamber. She relaxed when she recognized Vexila, the librarian, accompanied by two students from her class, Crix and Shardeth. Elder Mothera, Vexila said through her suit speakers, these students came to me asking questions I could not answer within official protocols. They demand to know why human achievements are classified beyond their clearance level. Crix moved forward, his individual consciousness more pronounced than when Sarah had first met him. Professor Chen, your lesson today changed something in my thinking patterns. For the first time, I experienced curiosity that wasn't shared by my collective. I need to understand what makes humans different. Shardetha's crystalline form pulsed with excited energy. The impossible structures you showed us violate everything we've learned about resource allocation and project management. How did humans coordinate such massive undertakings without hive mind consciousness or technological assistance? Sarah looked at the eager faces around her, then at the comprehensive historical records glowing in the chamber. Are you sure you want to know? Once you understand the truth about human development, you can't unlearn it. It will change how you see every challenge you face. We're sure, Crix replied, and Sarah noticed that he'd stopped referring to himself as part of the collective. The change was already beginning. For the next 4 hours, Sarah taught the most important history lesson of her career. She showed them how humans had survived the Tobas supervolcanic eruption that reduced their species to fewer than 10,000 individuals. She explained how they developed agriculture independently on multiple continents, built civilizations without written language, and created art that expressed individual human experience rather than collective consciousness. She detailed the Renaissance, when human creativity exploded after the constraints of medieval thinking were challenged. She described the scientific revolution, when humans began systematically questioning and testing everything they thought they knew about the universe. She explained the Industrial Revolution, when human innovation accelerated exponentially. But it was the stories of individual human determination that most fascinated her alien audience. She told them about Ernest Shackleton's Antarctic expedition, where crew members survived impossible conditions through leadership, ingenuity, and absolute refusal to abandon each other. She described the Apollo 13 mission, where human engineers on Earth worked with astronauts in space to solve problems that had never been encountered before, bringing 3 men home against impossible odds. The pattern is consistent throughout human history, Sarah explained. When faced with extinction, humans don't accept defeat. They innovate, adapt, and persist until they find a solution. They treat impossible challenges as puzzles to solve rather than fates to accept. Chardetha's form trembled with excitement. This explains the inconsistencies in human behavioral models. Your species doesn't follow standard evolutionary psychology because you've transcended evolutionary limitations through conscious choice. More than that, Vexila added, her tentacles moving in patterns of deep thought. Human achievements demonstrate that any species could potentially overcome their evolutionary constraints if they adopted similar approaches to problem solving. Elder Mothera's bioluminescent patches flickered with what Sarah was learning to recognize as satisfaction. Now you understand why the Educational Protection Protocol exists. If this knowledge spreads, prey species might stop hiding from predators and start outthinking them. Collective consciousness species might begin valuing individual innovation. Environmental specialists might attempt to expand beyond their adapted niches. The entire galactic social structure would change, Crick said, his individual consciousness now completely separate from his collective origins. Species would stop accepting limitations and start attempting to overcome them. A loud alarm suddenly echoed through the archives. Emergency lights bathed the chamber in red as an announcement crackled through the communication systems. Security alert. Unauthorized access to restricted archives detected. All personnel evacuate Level 7 immediately. They found us, Vexila said, her form agitated in her mobility tank. The archive access triggered automated security protocols. Sarah quickly downloaded the complete historical records to her personal data storage device while the others prepared to leave. We need to continue these lessons, she said, but not in university facilities. They'll be monitoring everything now. Elder Mothera moved toward the chamber exit with surprising speed. There are places in the Old Forest Preserve where my species first established settlements. Technology cannot easily monitor biological environments. As they prepared to escape the archives, Crix made an announcement that would change everything. Professor Chen, I've been sharing your lessons through bioneural links with other young individuals from collective consciousness species across the galaxy. The curiosity you've awakened is spreading faster than university security can track. How many? Sarah asked, realizing the implications. Thousands, Crix replied, and they're asking their own professors questions that cannot be answered within current educational protocols. The demand for complete historical records is becoming impossible to ignore. They slipped out of the archives just as security forces arrived, making their way through maintenance corridors toward the surface. As they climbed, Sarah realized that her simple history lesson had triggered something much larger than anyone had anticipated. The truth about human resilience wasn't just spreading among her students. It was propagating across the galaxy through communication networks, inspiring beings who had never questioned their limitations to suddenly wonder what might be possible. Over the following weeks, Sarah continued teaching in secret locations throughout the university's surrounding environment. Elder Mothera's Forest Preserve became a clandestine classroom where students from dozens of species gathered to learn about human history, and more importantly, to discuss how similar principles might apply to their own civilizations. The underground lessons grew in size and scope. Students began bringing historical records from their own species, comparing their civilizations' responses to challenges with human approaches. They discovered that while most galactic species had developed along predictable evolutionary paths, There were always individuals who had attempted to transcend those limitations. These historical figures had been edited out of official records, dismissed as anomalies rather than celebrated as innovators. Commander Maria Reeves, the human military advisor stationed at the University for Security Liaison duties, joined the secret classes after students began approaching her with questions about human military history. Unlike Sarah's academic approach, Reeves brought practical knowledge of how human strategic thinking worked in real situations. Humans don't just survive impossible situations, Reeves explained to a fascinated audience of alien students. We learn to create opportunities within those situations. Every constraint becomes a parameter to work within. Every limitation becomes a puzzle piece to use creatively. She demonstrated this by analyzing famous human military victories where vastly outnumbered forces had defeated superior enemies through innovative tactics. But more importantly, she showed how the same principles applied to scientific research, artistic creation, and social development. As the secret classes continued, something unprecedented began happening across the galaxy. Students who had attended the underground lessons returned to their home worlds carrying new ideas about possibility and limitation. They began questioning established social structures, challenging traditional approaches to problems, and most dramatically, attempting projects that their species had never considered feasible. The crystalline worlds reported that young individuals were forming temporary alliances to tackle large-scale engineering projects, abandoning their species' traditional consensus-building approach in favor of human-inspired leadership structures. Collective consciousness species were experiencing unprecedented numbers of individuals developing independent thought patterns after exposure to human historical examples. Most significantly, prey species across the galaxy were beginning to demonstrate what galactic anthropologists termed predatory innovation patterns. Instead of hiding from threats, they were analyzing them, developing countermeasures, and in some cases, actively confronting challenges that had previously driven them to flee. The Galactic Education Council called an emergency session as reports flooded in from universities across the galaxy. Student populations were demanding access to complete historical records. Faculty members were being challenged to explain why certain information was classified. Most disturbing to the Council, several species were beginning to demonstrate what they termed human-like problem-solving behaviors. Sarah learned about the Council's emergency session through Crix, whose individual consciousness had now developed to the point where he was operating completely independently of his collective origins. More remarkably, he wasn't alone. Thousands of young beings from collective consciousness species were experiencing similar individual development after exposure to human historical concepts. The Council is frightened, Crix reported during one of their Forest Preserve gatherings. They've realized that human thinking patterns are not just contagious. They're evolutionary advantageous. Species that adopt human approaches to impossible challenges consistently achieve better outcomes than those following traditional evolutionary paths. Sarah looked around at the diverse group of students gathered in the ancient trees. Beings who had evolved as prey animals were now discussing predatory strategic thinking. Environmental specialists were planning projects that would take them far beyond their adapted niches. Collective consciousness species were celebrating individual achievement. What have we started? She wondered aloud. Elder Mothera's bioluminescent patterns flickered with ancient wisdom. You have not started anything, Dr. Chun. You have simply revealed what was always possible. The truth that any species can choose to transcend the limitations of their evolutionary path. As if summoned by her words, emergency communication devices throughout the group began broadcasting a priority message from the university administration. All students and faculty report to the Grand Assembly Hall immediately. The Galactic Education Council will address recent disruptions to established educational protocols. Sarah realized that their underground revolution was about to become very public. The truth about human resilience had spread too far to contain, and now the entire galactic educational establishment would be forced to confront the implications of what they had tried so hard to suppress. The real test of human influence was about to begin. The truth unleashed. The Grand Assembly Hall of the Interstellar University had never seen such a gathering. Representatives from the Galactic Education Council occupied the central dais, their diverse forms creating a tableau of galactic authority. In the vast amphitheater surrounding them, thousands of students and faculty from hundreds of worlds had assembled, many appearing via holographic projection from distant universities where similar upheavals were occurring. Sarah sat in the designated faculty section, flanked by her unlikely allies. Elder Mothera, whose ancient wisdom had preserved the truth, Commander Reeves, whose practical knowledge had demonstrated human capabilities, and Vexila, the librarian who had chosen academic integrity over institutional loyalty. Around them, the evidence of their underground revolution was visible everywhere. Students from collective consciousness species sat as individuals rather than group clusters. Prey species displayed confident postures that would have been unthinkable weeks earlier. Environmental specialists wore equipment that would allow them to survive outside their adapted conditions. Chancellor Dormoth, the supreme administrator of galactic education, activated the amplification systems with a gesture of his massive crystalline appendages. His voice resonated through harmonic frequencies that every species could comprehend. We are gathered to address what the Council terms educational contamination events occurring across 17 star systems. These disruptions threaten the stability of established learning protocols that have maintained galactic harmony for millennia. A wave of discontent rippled through the assembly. Students who had attended Sarah's underground lessons exchanged glances, their various forms of communication creating a network of defiant understanding. Chancellor Dormoth continued, the unauthorized dissemination of uncensored human historical records has triggered psychological and social disruptions among impressionable students. Collective consciousness species are fragmenting into individual units. Prey species are displaying aggressive behaviors. Environmental specialists are attempting to survive outside their evolutionary niches. This chaos must be contained before it destroys the natural order that has allowed our galaxy to prosper in peace. Crix stood up in the student section, his individual consciousness now so fully developed that his presence no longer registered on collective consciousness networks. Chancellor Dormoth, with respect, you speak of disruption as if it were inherently negative. The students you describe as disrupted have achieved capabilities their species never thought possible. How is expanding potential considered harmful? Security forces moved toward Crix, but thousands of other students stood simultaneously in solidarity. The simple act of unified individual defiance, inspired by human historical examples, created a demonstration of power that no galactic authority had ever witnessed. The natural order exists for good reason, Chancellor Dormoth replied, his harmonics carrying undertones of barely controlled panic. Each species evolved along optimal paths for their survival and prosperity. Attempting to transcend evolutionary limitations leads to instability, conflict, and ultimately extinction. That's demonstrably false, Sarah said, rising from her faculty seat. She activated her personal data projector, flooding the assembly hall with images of human achievement. Humans have transcended evolutionary limitations repeatedly throughout their history, and rather than leading to extinction, it has allowed them to thrive in environments and situations that should have eliminated them entirely. The displays showed human settlements from the Arctic to the equator, underwater cities, space stations, and terraforming projects on hostile worlds. Each image demonstrated humanity's refusal to be constrained by their original evolutionary parameters. Furthermore, Sarah continued, the students you describe as contaminated are demonstrating enhanced problem-solving abilities, increased innovation, and improved adaptation to challenges. These are beneficial developments, not harmful ones. Ambassador Chinwei, Sarah's sister and Earth's representative to the Galactic Council, materialized via quantum hologram on the dais. Her presence caused a stir throughout the assembly, as humans rarely participated in galactic educational policy discussions. Chancellor Dormoth, Ambassador Chin said, her diplomatic training evident in her calm delivery, Earth formally challenges the Educational Protection Protocol as a violation of the Universal Rights of Sentient Beings, Article 12. the right to complete and accurate historical education. The systematic censorship of human history constitutes cultural discrimination and educational malpractice. The Chancellor's crystalline form dimmed with what Sarah recognized as extreme agitation. Ambassador Chun, the protocol exists to protect galactic stability. Human historical concepts are mimetic hazards that fundamentally alter cognitive patterns in exposed individuals. You mean they inspire beings to refuse to accept limitations? Ambassador Chun replied. That's not a hazard, Chancellor. That's evolution in action. Elder Mothera stood slowly, her ancient form commanding immediate attention throughout the assembly. When she spoke, her bioluminescent patches flickered with authority accumulated over centuries of observation. I have watched this institution for longer than most of your species have possessed written language, she began. I have seen countless attempts to suppress knowledge that challenges established thinking. Every time, the suppressed knowledge eventually emerges stronger and more influential than if it had been taught openly from the beginning. Her form shifted as she accessed memory banks containing millennia of experience. The Galactic Education Council fears human history because it proves that their fundamental assumption is wrong. They believe that evolution determines limitation, but humans demonstrate that consciousness can choose to transcend evolutionary constraints through will, innovation, and persistent effort. Shardath, the crystalline student who had been among the first to attend Sarah's underground lessons, projected himself to full visibility in the student section. Elder Mothera speaks truth. Since learning about human historical development, I have achieved computational capabilities that exceed my species' theoretical maximums, not through genetic modification or technological enhancement, but through applying human approaches to problem-solving that refuse to accept impossible as an answer. Similar testimonies erupted throughout the assembly. Students from dozens of species shared their own breakthrough achievements accomplished by applying human-inspired thinking to their traditional limitations. Collective consciousness beings described the liberation of individual creativity. Prey species detailed successful confrontations with threats they would previously have fled. Environmental specialists reported successful adaptation to conditions far outside their evolved parameters. Commander Reeves activated her military communications array, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making life-or-death decisions under impossible circumstances. Chancellor Dormoth, you've made a fundamental error in your analysis. You assume that stability and security come from accepting limitations. Human military history proves the opposite. Security comes from developing the capability to overcome any limitation that threatens your survival or prosperity. The Assembly Hall's main display activated without authorization, showing a real-time galactic communication network map. Thousands of data streams pulsed between star systems as the underground revolution continued to spread. Students across the galaxy were sharing human historical records, comparing notes on limitation-transcending achievements, and most significantly, attempting their own impossible projects. Look at what's happening, Sarah said, gesturing to the display. This isn't contamination or chaos. This is evolution accelerating. Species across the galaxy are discovering capabilities they never knew they possessed because they were never taught that limitations could be overcome. The Chancellor's form pulsed with emergency frequencies as he consulted with other council members through quantum-encrypted channels. When he returned his attention to the assembly, his harmonics carried a note of desperate authority. The Galactic Education Council hereby implements Emergency Protocol 7, he announced. All unauthorized historical materials will be confiscated. Students demonstrating contaminated thinking patterns will be quarantined for treatment. Dr. Sarah Chun and her associates are banned from all educational facilities and ordered to return to Earth immediately. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Every student who had attended Sarah's underground lessons stood in unified defiance. But more than that, students across the galaxy began broadcasting their own acts of resistance through the communication networks. Emergency Protocol 7 is rejected, Crix announced, his voice somehow carrying across the assembly despite his species' typically quiet communication methods. We are not contaminated. We are awakened. The display screens throughout the assembly hall suddenly filled with images from across the galaxy. On the crystalline worlds, young individuals were constructing architectural projects that violated their species' traditional geometric constraints. In the aquatic systems, students were developing technology that would allow them to explore dry land environments. Most dramatically, on the collective consciousness worlds, thousands of beings were simultaneously declaring individual identity while maintaining cooperative bonds. You cannot quarantine an idea whose time has come, Elder Mothera observed, her ancient wisdom cutting through the chaos. The concept that limitations exist to be overcome rather than accepted has already taken root across the galaxy. Attempting to suppress it now will only accelerate its spread. Ambassador Chen activated emergency diplomatic protocols, her holographic form gaining additional authority indicators. Earth invokes Article 15 of the Galactic Charter, the right to cultural preservation. The systematic censorship and planned destruction of human historical records constitutes cultural genocide. Earth demands immediate cessation of all suppression activities and full restoration of human historical materials to galactic educational curricula. Chancellor Dormotha's crystalline structure began showing stress fractures as the full scope of the crisis became apparent. Reports flooded in from universities across the galaxy. Student strikes, faculty resignations, and demands for complete historical transparency. More troubling still, several species were reporting breakthrough achievements accomplished by applying human-inspired approaches to problems their civilizations had considered unsolvable for millennia. This is precisely what we feared, the Chancellor admitted, his harmonics carrying undertones of defeat. Human thinking patterns don't just inspire individual achievement. They fundamentally alter civilizational development trajectories. Species that adopt human approaches to impossible challenges begin achieving outcomes that violate established models of what their evolution should permit. And that terrifies you, Sarah said, understanding the true depth of the galactic establishment's fear. Not because it's harmful, but because it proves that your entire educational philosophy is based on limiting potential rather than developing it. Commander Reeves stepped forward, her military bearing commanding attention throughout the assembly. Chancellor, in human military doctrine, we have a saying, adapt, improvise, overcome. Every challenge is an opportunity to develop new capabilities. Your educational system teaches the opposite. You train beings to accept defeat before they've attempted victory. The communication displays showed real-time data that made the scope of change undeniable. Scientific research stations across the galaxy were reporting breakthrough discoveries achieved by research teams that had abandoned traditional species-limited approaches in favor of human-inspired innovation methods. Engineering projects thought impossible were suddenly achieving success as beings applied human concepts of persistent problem-solving to technical challenges. Most remarkably, the galaxy's chronic resource allocation problems were beginning to resolve as species learned to think creatively about seemingly impossible logistical challenges rather than accepting scarcity as inevitable. The irony, Vexila observed through her suit speakers, is that the Educational Protection Protocol has accomplished the exact opposite of its intended purpose. By attempting to quarantine human historical concepts, the Council has made them more attractive and powerful. Forbidden knowledge always spreads faster than approved curriculum. Young students throughout the assembly began activating personal communication devices, broadcasting their support for educational freedom to peer networks across the galaxy. The underground revolution was becoming a public movement, with beings from hundreds of worlds demanding access to complete historical records and the right to learn about limitation-transcending achievements. Suddenly, the Assembly's emergency communication system activated with a priority transmission from the Galactic Senate. The image of Senator Vextar, the ancient Void Walker, who served as Senate Majority Leader, appeared on all displays. Chancellor Dormoth, the senator's psychic voice resonated through quantum fields. The Senate has received thousands of formal complaints from student populations across 17 star systems. They demand immediate educational reform and threaten to withdraw from galactic academic institutions unless their concerns are addressed. The Chancellor's form flickered with panic frequencies. Senator, the situation is under control. Emergency protocols will contain the disruption. No, Chancellor, they will not. Senator Vextar replied with the authority of someone who had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations. The Senate has reviewed the evidence presented by Ambassador Chun regarding human historical achievements. We find the Educational Protection Protocol to be in violation of multiple galactic treaties and immediately order its suspension. A cheer erupted throughout the assembly that was audible across species barriers. Students from dozens of worlds celebrated through their various communication methods, creating a symphony of triumph that echoed through the hall. Furthermore, the senator continued, the Senate formally recognizes Dr. Sarah Chen's work as legitimate academic research of the highest importance. The Galactic Education Council is hereby ordered to establish a new curriculum division. Interspecies Historical Studies, with Dr. Chen as its founding director. Sarah felt the weight of galactic history settling on her shoulders, but also the exhilaration of an impossible challenge that had suddenly become achievable. Around her, she saw the faces of beings who had learned that limitations existed to be overcome, not accepted. The revolution you have started, Elder Mothera said, quietly to Sarah, will reshape galactic civilization. Species will no longer accept that they cannot achieve something simply because their evolution did not specifically prepare them for it. Over the following months, the transformation exceeded everyone's expectations. The new Interspecies Historical Studies program became the most popular curriculum in galactic educational history. Students flocked to learn not just about human achievements, but about limitation-transcending figures from every species' history who had been previously edited out of official records. More importantly, the practical applications of human-inspired thinking began solving problems that had plagued galactic civilization for millennia. Species learned to cooperate without assimilation, to compete without conflict, and to innovate beyond their evolutionary programming. The crystalline worlds developed artistic expressions that had been impossible under their traditional geometric constraints. Collective consciousness species discovered that individual creativity enhanced rather than threatened group achievement. Prey species began developing technology and strategies that eliminated their vulnerability to predation. That Sarah's office in the new Interspecies Historical Studies building overlooked the university's central plaza, where beings from hundreds of worlds gathered daily to share stories of achievements they had once thought impossible. Through her window, she could see a group of environmental specialists from the ice worlds teaching fire-adapted beings how to survive in their frozen homelands, while nearby, former prey species were leading strategic planning sessions for complex engineering projects. The most remarkable thing, Sarah reflected to Crix during one of their regular conversations, is that we didn't teach anyone anything truly new. We just showed them what they were already capable of achieving. Crix, whose individual consciousness had become so well-developed that he was now leading his own research into collective individual hybrid thinking, nodded thoughtfully. Humans didn't invent the ability to transcend limitations. You just refused to accept that limitations couldn't be transcended. Once we learned that impossible was simply another problem to solve, everything changed. As Sarah prepared for her next lecture, a class on comparative approaches to impossible challenges that would include students from 47 different species, she reflected on the true lesson of the past year. The galaxy hadn't needed human solutions to their problems. They had needed human perspectives on what constituted a problem versus what constituted an inevitable reality. The greatest human achievement, she realized, wasn't surviving impossible odds or building incredible civilizations or reaching for the stars. It was the simple revolutionary idea that limitations exist to be overcome, not accepted. And now, that idea belonged to the entire galaxy. Through her office window, Sarah watched as a group of students from species that had never previously interacted worked together on a project to establish the first truly universal communication system. Their approach violated every traditional limitation of cross-species cooperation, but they were making remarkable progress by simply refusing to accept that such cooperation was impossible. The future stretched ahead, full of challenges that would have seemed impossible just months ago. But Sarah no longer worried about impossible challenges. After all, she was human, and humans had learned long ago that impossible was just another word for something they hadn't figured out yet. The galaxy was about to learn the same lesson.